The first time you take on a freelancing project of your own, the amount of tasks you have to handle can seem quite daunting. It may seem like there are lots of things you have to do at once: wireframe, design, and develop multiple pages. Then you fill them with content and get the client to approve on things. Finally, you test and move it to production. There's lots to do. Now, if you're like me and tend to get bored of working on one thing after a while, it might be tempting to design the front page and code that up before moving on to the next page. But that's not really the best way to manage these tasks. As you take on more projects, you will develop a more effective workflow, breaking down the project into stages and focusing on few tasks at a time. But rather than developing that over time and making mistakes as you go along, let's look at how other freelancers do this. Earlier, we created a project proposal template in which we outlined a few different stages for the client without really going over what each of those stages meant. Let's go over them right now. We can break our projects down into around 4 stages: planning, design, development, and pre-launch. The tasks in each of these phases are fairly distinct from one another that we can group them into stages. The stages are also structured in a way that at the end of each, you have a set of deliverables to hand over to the client and time for them to review it before you move on to the next stage. Each stage can also have certain dependencies, whether from the client or another third party, that has to be met before the stage can either start or be completed. The first stage in our workflow is the planning stage. At this point, we have already gone over most of the tasks in the planning stage. We just didn't categorize them as such. The planning stage is very important because almost all the decision-making happens here. Your initial client interactions set the stage for the rest of the project. We start with a requirements analysis. This is a formal way of saying we gather as much information as possible. We achieved this earlier by using a questionnaire broken down into sections like client goals, target audience, feature requests, and so on. This section is crucial to getting the project off to a good start. And depending on who you talk to, the second step is creating a project charter. The charter takes all the information gathered in the previous step during the requirements analysis and summarizes that information. It serves as a reference document both to you and the client and is usually short and to the point. You can find varying opinions on the usefulness of project charters. Not everyone deems it necessary. At this point, neither party has signed a contract, and there's a high chance that you won't work on the project at all. If you spend time writing a project charter only to move on to other things, that's time wasted. On the other hand, if you do end up working on the project, the charter serves as a good reference. Like most things we've talked about, there isn't one right way. That being said, we won't cover it, however, because I think that this early on in your freelance career, you won't encounter very many situations where a project charter is needed. With the requirements analysis done, you have enough information together to write up your contracts, quotes, and project proposals. We've covered project proposals and quotes already. Contracts are also extremely vital to the success of both your project and your career, but we'll cover that soon enough. Once the contracts are signed and you agree to start the project, there's a few important pieces of information you need to get before you move on to the next stage. You're going to need a site map, so you understand both how the client wants the site to be laid out and how you can guide visitors from one page to the next smoothly and efficiently. You'll also need to gather basic site or database login information or any details that would be necessary for you to start working on the project. These items are dependencies, and the client needs to be made aware that you need this information to get started. Now, that should be all the information you need to collect during your planning stage, and luckily for us, we've already done most of that work. Let's look at the next stage, the design or the creative stage. During the design stage, your primary task is to take all the information you gathered in the planning stage and lay it out visually. Your goals at the end of this stage are to have a site structure and a visual representation of it. The design process can also be further broken down into the following steps. Wireframes. Before you start doing any of the heavy design work, you can quickly sketch up wireframes to depict the visual hierarchy of the website. Wireframes allow you to put down on paper or on software how the entire site will flow. Since wireframes are simple line drawings, it's very easy to make changes, so if you don't like something or the client wants certain changes, you can implement them fairly quickly. Once you have the wireframes done, the next step is to mock up the website. visually representing as close to the final product as you can get. While in the past, mockups meant predominantly working in Photoshop and sending the files over, lots of designers now mock up their websites straight in HTML and CSS. Technology has improved vastly enough to allow them to do so. This practice is on the rise not only because it makes for a better workflow, but also because changes can be implemented with more ease if needed. Next is review and approval. For both the wireframes and mockups, get the client's approval before you progress. Make the review process as flexible as possible, allowing the client and yourself to tweak the design until both of you are satisfied. Don't be afraid to offer your opinion here. Educate the client on your design choices and why your solutions can provide the desired outcomes. The client won't agree with you on everything, of course, but the point is to come to a solution that benefits both parties. Once you have the wireframes and mockup set, you can move on to coding it up, unless you did your initial mock straight in CSS, of course. Regardless of how you set up your stages, make sure each stage has deliverables. So after a certain period of time, you send the client your wireframes and mockups, give them plenty of time for review, and then spend the remaining allotted time during the design stage coding up the visual elements. Budget yourself enough time to take care of these tasks. Allowing for sufficient review time is critical to keeping the client happy and reducing the number of headaches on your part. Don't worry, you'll get better at estimating the time you need to set aside for this as you take on more projects. So that covers our planning and design stages. Let's see how we can break the rest of the project down as we move along.